Hello, everyone. Hope this looks familiar. I'm recording a daf again ahead of time, and this today is a daf for Sunday, or Chullin, daf Nun Tet 59 in Chullin. We'll get right to it. Yesterday, I recorded the daf. Hopefully, people heard it and listened to it. We got to the bottom. I think I actually did the last line, but I'm going to read it again on Daf Nun Chet Amud Bet, which is the question of my tia. We had a brighta yesterday that talked about different kinds of poison, or not really so much poison, but very sharp things that will damage an animal. And we said that even so, they're kosher. What is tia, which was one of those things? I'm Rav Yehuda, and I'll turn to Daf Nun Tet Amud Aleph, top of the page. Ikra de Maririta. It is the ikar, the root of a very, very bitter vegetable. So that's something that can damage the animal, but as the Brighta said, it's not going to make it a treifa, and it's not going to make it not edible. Now, while we're on the topic of all these different kinds of poisons or bad foods that animals eat, says Rav Yehuda at the top of Daf Nun Tet Amud Aleph, let me just get to it. Amar Rav Yehuda, Haiman da'achla takli, tleta takli cheltit. A person who eats three takli is just like a coin's worth. So value, $3, let's say, worth of chiltit, which is something we talked about yesterday, and I didn't really know what it meant, but I read this word in English, asafoitida. I don't know what that is. But anyway, someone who eats $3 worth of chiltit, aliba rekana, on an empty stomach, pff, you're toast. Mishtiklach mashre. His skin's gonna peel off. Some say it's because he'll get fever. Some say it's because he gets so itchy that he scratches his skin until it comes off. Terrible for you. Rabbi Avo, says Rabbi Avo, I once made this mistake. But Didi Avi Uvda once happened to me, and I ate one takli of chiltit, right? I ate $1 worth of chaltita, and Ilo diatvi b'mai, if I didn't go sit in water, which I guess helps cool you down or helps get rid of the itching, mishtaklach mashka, I would have pulled off my skin. V'kiyamti batzmi, but I fulfilled in myself hachachma techaya bala. Wisdom, knowledge, knowing what the trufa is will allow you to live. So I had knowledge. I guess I had read the medical books and I knew what to do when I made this terrible mistake of eating a cheltit. I'm Rav Yosef. Now, says Rav Yosef, so just to want to point something out to you. And when you're talking about eating improper things, if you eat, now this is bizarre, I don't know what it's from, but if you eat 16 eggs, v'arba'i amgozi, and 40 nuts, 40 almonds, v'shav butitita de parchi, and 7 caper flowers, caper fruits, the pirchi or the flowers, but the 7 capers, Ushati revi'ata de duvshan, and you drink a revi'at of honey, and you do this in the middle of the summer, betkufat Tammuz, and right now in this season, in Tammuz, aliba rekan, on an empty stomach, you're gonna go mitaker talia deliba. Your heart's gonna be ripped apart. You're gonna have a heart attack. You're gonna have some aneurysm. You're gonna die. So don't do this. Now again, I don't really know what this regimen is or why anyone would ever do this. Maybe it was a new age diet in Rav Yosef's time, but don't do it. Now the next case is from the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, "Oh, we'll get to the Mishnah. So, right, we talked in the Mishnah about things that were spit by a poisonous snake." Right? That the poison, if it might be possible, might not, it depends on what kind of poison. Anyway, so who Bartavia? There was a Bartavia. Bartavia means a small, a bar is a baby a deer, a small deer. Da'atala be'reish galuta. They brought this animal to Reish Galuta for dinner, right? It was brought to shecht and eat. But it wasn't such a normal animal. Havi mafsikun karen batraito. It was dragging its legs behind it, right? So it had weak legs, may have a broken leg, maybe it was numb, but it was not walking normally. So Badke Rav B'Tzomen. So Rav checked the nerve center behind the legs, which we've talked about before, and we'll talk about more, which could be a treifa, but it was normal. The nerves were not damaged. So he said, this animal's kosher. Now, then they shechted the animal, and savar lemechel minei b'umtza. So Rav said, okay, let me have some of this steak from this nice young deer. Umsa means rare, right? I'll eat like carpaccio from it. I'll eat some rare steak. I'm like, Shmuel said, Shmuel, no. How could you eat that? Aren't you worried that maybe it was bitten by a snake? Maybe the reason it's weak is not because there was damage to the limbs, but because it got poison in it. So you can't eat the raw meat. Amar lei, so said Rav to Shmuel, so okay, but how are you going to figure that out? My takante. How can you solve this in terms of making it able to be eaten, right? So Shmuel explained Now, what you could do is that um, you can notzvei betanura. You can put it in an oven to because it will be checked on its own, meaning it's a self-correcting mechanism. So what happened? Otzvei, they put it in the oven, and nafal tilchi. It fell off the bone like little tilchi, little bits by bits, which is a sign that there was poison there. I don't know how the sign works, but somehow the muscles were not strong with each other, and the thing basically dripped off the bone, and that's a sign that you should not eat it. And Kari Shmuel later Rav, so Shmuel said about Rav, look, I saved your skin. You almost ate this poison. Lo yu'nel tzaddik kol aven. Pasuk in Mishlei. No bad thing will happen to a tzaddik. And so Kari Rav later Shmuel, and Rav said about Shmuel, yeah, but you're the one who saved me. Kol raz lo aneslach. Every secret will not cause you any problem, meaning Shmuel knew all the secrets. Shmuel was the doctor, of course. Shmuel knew all the secrets about poisonous snake bites and things like that. Anyways, now that we did poison, we're up to the Mishnah on Daf Nuntet Amud Aleph. We're on the quarter of the way down, and the Mishnah gets to something which, of course, is familiar to most of us, hopefully, which are what is a kosher animal? Forget about treifa. We did treifa. We're going to get there back. Don't worry. But we did a lot of treifa for the last 2 weeks and more 3 weeks. But what is a kosher animal? What is a behemah? What we call behemah tahora, right? We use the word kosher in our lexicon, but the Torah calls it behemah tahora and behemah she'eno tahora or behemah tme'ah. Says the Mishnah, well, the Torah tells us, simanei behemah v'chaya nemar b'Torah. The simanim for an animal or a wild animal, which are the same, are said in the Torah, right? They have to have split hooves and chew their cud. But simanei oflo never, the Torah never says these are the signs of a kosher bird. Aval amru chachamim, but the Torah gives a list of birds, but it doesn't give simanim. Aval amru chachamim, the chachamim said, well, even though the Torah gave a list, there are principles, because kol of hadores, any bird that attacks and claws its prey is tameh. There's a lot of different interpretations of when does it claw? Does it claw in the air? Does it attack? Or does it come down and pick up its food? But either way, whatever it means, any of bird that's dores is tameh. And kol sheyesh lo etzba yitir, any bird that has an extra digit, right? So instead of having 3 digits, it has 4 digits. And zefek v'kor kabano niklaf. Sorry, it's 3 things. It has a zefek, which is the crop, which is where it sort of sits and the food sits in the throat, I guess, before it gets digested. And the third thing is that its gizzard, its kurkabano, can be peeled off. So it's not attached very closely. Those are simanim of tahara. Okay? So any bird that has those 3 simanim is tahar. Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadok Omer, kol ofa choleket raglav tameh. Any bird that splits its legs, meaning when it sits on the wire, 2 digits go in front and 2 go back, that's a sign of tumah. If it doesn't have 3 on one side and 1 on the other, that's considered to be a tameh bird. Okay, so those are birds. Now, what about grasshoppers? How do we know which grasshoppers are kosher? The Torah doesn't say, right? Chagavim, it's kol sheyesh lo arba raglaim. Any grasshopper that has 4 legs and arba kinafayim and 4 wings, and kartsulayim. We can't say kartsulayim as these jumping legs like you see on a praying mantis, those 2 long legs that go over the whole body. And knafav cholfin etrubo, and its wings cover most of the body. They're not tiny little wings, they're big wings. So if you have those things, that's kosher. Rabbi Yossi says, well, not enough. It has to be called a chagav, shmuel chagav. They have to call it a grasshopper. But any species of grasshopper that's called a grasshopper and has these samanim is kosher. Ubidagim, and the 4th type of animals. So we had mammals, I guess. We had birds, grasshoppers, and now fish. The Torah also says, kol sheyesh lo snapir v'kaskeshet, kashkeshet, any fish that has fins and scales. Yehuda says, well, the minimum it has to have is shnei kaskasim, sorry. It's always confusing for me. Usnapir echad. It has to have at least 2 scales and 1 fin. Elehim kaskasim. What are kaskasim? Those are the things that are kavuimbo, those things that are attached to the animal. And sampirim, the fin, is hapareach bem. It's the thing it uses to swim. We say fly, but flying in the water is swimming, the thing that it moves to make it go. Okay, that's the Mishnah. Obviously, we're going to discuss this Mishnah for a couple days now. Let's start from the beginning. Tanu Rabbanan says the Braita, Elohein simanei behema v'chayat said, these are the simanim of a behema. Sorry, where's the place? There we go. Okay. It says in the pasuk, kol behema mafreset parsa, right? Any animal, this is a Braita, any animal that has split hooves, says the Braita, the pasuk continues, v'shosat, shesa, right, shnei prasot, whatever, that it's kosher. Kol behema shemalat gera, says the bright, to any animal that chews its cud, b'yedua she'en la shinayim lamala v'tohara, you know it has no upper teeth, and it's kosher. So we talk a lot about the teeth of an animal, right? All animals, I guess, I don't have pictures in front of me, have lower teeth and jaw, basically, but only sort of animals that bite and eat other animals, presumably, or whatever, will have upper teeth to cut into something. If they eat grass, like most domestic animals, then they don't have these upper teeth. So if you have an animal that chews its cud, that means the way it eats is by its food ruminating and sitting there, and it doesn't chew food. Remember, a cow doesn't chew its food. It bites grass, it swallows it, it goes into the stomach, and then comes back up and is chewed once it's already partially digested. So, anyways, that animal, you know that there's no teeth and it's tahora. Does it work? Klalo, is that actually a principle that chewing your cud and teeth are never there together? Meaning, if you chew your cud, you don't have upper teeth. Hey, Gamal, what about the camel? The camel's malay gerahu. The camel chews its cud. The einlo shinayim lamala, and it doesn't have teeth above, right? Like other animals that chew their cud, but tameh. But it's still tameh. Why is a camel tameh? You said any animal has no teeth and chews its cud is tahar, but a camel's tameh. Answers the Gemara, because gamal nivi itmeh. It doesn't have the teeth, the shinayim, but it has these nivi. It's all unclear what nivi are. There's some kind of, teeth, but they're clearly not shinayim, right? Because we say ein lo shinayim lamala. Rashi says there are these like bony protrusions that a camel has. Anyways, it has something that's like teeth, but not real teeth. Says the Gemara, okay, but that's only true about a mature camel. Hare ben gamal, what about a baby camel? A baby camel, the nivi nami letlei, doesn't have nivi. So this is an animal now that chews its cud. It has no teeth, it has no nivi, and it's still tameh. But you said the simon is that if it doesn't have those things, it's tahar. But two, and furthermore, there's other animals. I'm not really sure what you mean that these are the only animals. So hare shafan v'arnevet. What about a shafan, which they translate here as a hyrax? And our nevet, which is we translate as a rabbit or a hare. The malay gera pain, they do chew their cud as well, which is news to me. The yesh lahem shinayim mala, but they have teeth, utmeim, and they're tamei. So your principle that any animal that chews its cud doesn't have teeth is clearly not true about these two animals. The Odin, furthermore, what do you mean the teeth are what matter? Shinayim miktivi, right? Does the Torah say anything about teeth? The Torah never mentions that. The Torah mentions chewing your cud and split hooves. Elachi Kamer, this is what the Braita was saying. Look, kol behema she'ein la shinayim lamala, any animal that has no teeth above, you know just from that sign, b'yadu shimalat geira mafresa parsa Torah. You know that it chews its cud, and that's why it doesn't have teeth, and it has split hooves, and it's going to be tahar. So, thank you very much, but that's not the siman the Torah gave. So why don't you just check? What do you mean you know that it has split hooves? Look at the hooves. The livdog the parsotah. Check, you can't see when an animal's dead, whether it's dying, whether it's going to chew its cud, but you can check its feet. So check its feet. Says more. Well, obviously, we're talking about a case where you couldn't check the feet. Let's say its hooves were cut off, right, or damaged, so you couldn't tell if they were split. Let's say you're out there in the wild and matzah behema, you find an animal. Again, the wild here is probably a metaphor for somewhere away from civilization. You find an animal, its feet are split, are cut off, sorry, not chatu, are split, right? Its feet are cut off so that you don't know if it's split hooves. Says Rav Chisda, bodek b'piyah, check the mouth. If there are no teeth above, no whatever these teeth are, b'yadushi Torah, you know that it's tahar. Imlav, if it does, sorry, the opposite, right? Imlav, if it doesn't not have teeth, meaning if it does have teeth, b'yadushi tme'ah, right? So if the siman is not there and the animal has teeth, you know it's tameh. Now the exception we just said was that a young camel is tameh, but it doesn't have teeth yet. So you have to bilvachi akir gamal. You have to know what a camel looks like. If you can't tell whether this meat or this animal is a camel, then obviously you can't rely on the siman, because it might be that it's a young camel that does not yet have teeth that you can check, right? Oh, sorry, I read it too fast. Vachi akir gamal. As long as you recognize a camel, because a camel doesn't have teeth. The Gemara said before, gamal nivi itlay. A camel has nivi, so it does have sort of teeth. Ela bilvachi akir ben gamal. You have to be able to recognize a young camel, right, and And a young camel is an animal that is tameh. It doesn't have teeth. It doesn't have nevi, but it's not split hooves. It does have split hooves. It's not split hooves, right? And it chews its cud. So it's an animal that is it does have split hooves. I take it back. And it is tameh. So does camel have split hooves? I don't think so, I guess. I don't think it has split hooves. Well, I guess someone will correct me. Anyways, says the Gemara, so that is the proof. Look at the teeth. Look at what's above. If there are no teeth above, it tells you that it has chews its cud. It tells you that it has split hooves. If you can check the hooves, of course, check them. But every animal, this is a good principle. The exception is a young camel. So you have to be able to certify that this is not a young camel. Says the Gemara, I don't understand. You just told me that this is not a true rule, that the young camel doesn't have teeth and doesn't is not kosher. Lav Amr Ika Ben Gamal, didn't you just say that there's an exception to the rule? The exception to the rules of Ben Gamal. If you have an exception to the rule of a Ben Gamal, maybe there's some other animal. And who knows the whole wide world? You've never been to Africa? Who knows? Ikanami Mina Achrina Dami the Ben Gamal. Maybe there's another species that is similar to a Ben Gamal, meaning how do you say for sure that it is a rule that every animal with teeth or without teeth is kosher? Says no, it's not true. Lo sal kedaitach. There's no other animal. The Tanan Rebbe Shmuel, we have a brighter from Rebbe Shmuel, Tanan Rebbe Shmuel. It says in the pasuk that gamal, don't eat a gamal, right? Because, this is correct. This is the pasuk. Kimale gerahu, because even though it chews its cud, it's mafreset parsa lo frisa, right? Tamehu. Its feet are not split. Says the Gemara, Shalit bo lama yodea. The one who rules the world, Hashem, knows. She'in lecha davar malei gera v'tamei ela gamal. Torah says who? It says the gamal ki malat gera who? It is the only animal that chews its cud, but it's tamei. And lefikach parabo katov who? That's why the pasuk says who. So that is, you don't have to worry that there's another animal. Another principle. Let's say you go and you're walking down the road and you find an animal, let's just say it was shechted, or even if it's alive and you shechted it, and its mouth is gamum, which means it's mutilated, it's unrecognizable. So you can't check if it's got teeth, right? Says Rav Chisda, well, then check its hooves. Bodeka parsota, you check its hooves. In parsota stukot, if its hooves are split, then you know b'yadush Torah. In lav b'yadush tmeya. Right? Now, remember, there's an exception, and the exception is a pig. Remember, a pig has split hooves, but it doesn't chew its cud. Says Rav Chisda, you're chazir. You have to be able to recognize whether the animal's a chazir or whether the meat looks like it comes from a chazir, because you can't prove kashrut from the hooves unless you can rule out that it's a pig. And ask the Gemara the same question, right? Blav Amerika chazir. So I don't get it. You said there's a chazir. If there's a chazir, maybe Kanami Minachina, the Dami chazir. Maybe there's some other species in the world that's similar to a chazir, right? Lo Sankadaita says where that's not likely. The Tanan Rebbe Shmuel, because again, as Rebbe Shmuel said, Tanan Rebbe Shmuel, the pasuk says that the chazir, don't eat a chazir ki mafris parsahu. It has split hooves, but it doesn't chew its cud. So again, it says the word who. Shalit bo lamo yodea, the one who runs the world knows. She'in lecha davar shemafris parsa v'tamei chazir. The only animal species that chews its cud but is tamei is a pig. Lefikach parabah katuv hu. Now, pig could be a big family, but only pig family. Amar Rav Chisda. Now, furthermore, it says Rav Chisda, hayam halech b'midbar. Let's say you're walking through the desert and matzah behema, you find an animal, but now you're stuck because the mouth is mutilated, the feet are cut off. So you can't look for any simanim. Shapia gamum parsoteh chatuchot. Says Rav Chisda, you're not stuck. Bodek bibisara. Check the meat. Check the animal. Take out the meat. Im mahalech sheti ve'erev. If it runs, meaning it stretches in both directions, in the sheti and the erev, right, the warp and the woof, meaning the two directions, then that b'yadei Torah. You know it's a Torah animal. I have no idea what the siman is, that the meat of a behemah tmeah does not stretch, according to Rav Chisda, the same way a meat of a behemah Torah. However, there's one exception, and that is a donkey. Bavad shiakir arvad. You have to know what a donkey is, or wild donkey, they translate it, but a donkey is like a kosher animal, even though it's not kosher. Again, we asked, well, then how can you rely on this principle? Lav amrit ika arvad. Didn't you say that there's a donkey that it stretches its meat like a kosher animal, maybe ikanami min achrita achrina dedami l'arvad. And it says, Gemara, Gemir deleka. We have a tradition that there's no other animal. So this time we don't have a pasuk because there's no pasuk about a donkey, but we have a tradition. Ask the Gemara, when you do this check, you check the meat. Hecha barik, which part of the animal do you check? Amar Abaye v'Teimer Chisda bekanfei ha'oketz. You check the edge, the knaf, the edge of the oketz, which is the tailbone, the back. I don't know what those steaks are called in that part of the animal, but specific part of the animal, you check there, and there's different qualities to kosher meat and non-kosher meat, and you will be able, if you're an expert, of course, which I am not, you will be able to tell the difference by doing this test. Okay, so that is where we're up to, the last line of Daf Chaf, Nun Tet Amud Aleph. Now, the Mishnah continued, right? Am I up to the last line? I think so. Yep. The Mishnah continued and said, Simanei behima v'chaya, right? Says the Braita Ton Rabbanan, Elohein simanei chaya. These are the simanim of a chaya. Says, what are you talking about? There are no such thing as simanim of a chaya. Chaya and a behima have the exact same simanim, split hooves and chewing their cud. Says, chaya b'chlal behima hili simanim. What do you mean these are simanim of a chaya? A chaya is the same thing as a behima for simanim. Amr Reb Zeir, no, you misunderstood what the Braita is trying to teach you, which is that, remember that it's true for kosher or not kosher, or tar or not tar, the simanim are the same. But remember that there's a difference between a behema and a chaya, which is that you're allowed to eat the chelev, right? You're allowed to eat the fat of a chaya. You're not allowed to eat the fat of a behema, right? So you basically need to know, you kill an animal, it's split hooves, chews its cud, you open it up, and there's all this delicious fat in there that would be permitted if it was a chaya and prohibited if it was a behema. How do you know if it's a chaya or a behema? How do you know what's a wild animal and what's a domestic animal? So that's the answer. It says Rav Zeir Latir Chalba, turn to Daf Nun Tet Amud Bet. The question of what's a chaya is regards to whether you can eat the fat, is the kosher fat of that animal. Right? So what are the simanim of a chaya? Hachikama, this is what the Braita is saying, top line of Nun Tet Amud Bet. Elohein simanei chaya shechalba mutar. The simanim of a chaya that would therefore allow you to eat the fat of that animal is kol sheish la karnayim u'tlafayim. Any animal that has horns, karnayim or horns, u'tlafayim, and these are, tlafayim literally means hooves, right? But essentially, Rashi says doesn't mean just hooves, it means tziparnea parsot, that it has like nails, basically. I don't really know how to say it in English, but it has special tziparnim, special like nails on its hooves. Okay? Says the Gemara, Reb Dosa Omer, look, an animal she'ish karnayim, it has horns. You don't have to look at its hooves because it's enough if they go together, right? If you have horns. But yesh lo tlafayim, if you only look at the hooves and you find the siman, you still have to look at the horns because sometimes you get the hooves but not the horns, not the karnayim. The keresh, now remember, a keresh is an animal that we often talk about as a unicorn, as a mythical animal because it has, well, that's not really mythical, but it has one horn. Says Reb Dosa, af al pi, she'ein lo el keren achat, even though it only has one horn coming out of its head, mutar. The animal is mutar. So any animal that has a horn, even one horn, or many horn, or two horns or more, is a chaya. You can eat the fat, but doesn't have horns, you can't eat the fat. It says, Klalahu, is that really a principle? Hare is. What about a goat? Right? Everyone knows that goats have horns. Yeshlo karnayim, utlafayim, and it has this thing in its hooves, and it's an animal. It's not a chaya, it's a behema, chalbo asur. Says you're right. And a goat has horns, but they're not the kind of horns that we're talking about. We need to have horns that are kluchot, that are layered, that they form one layer on top of another, and the horns of a goat are not like that. What about a shor? What about a male cow? The kruchot, it has horns that are layered, and its chalbo is also asur. Says you're right, but charukot beina. You need to have horns that are grooved. They are like sort of have an indentation. I don't have pictures, but horns that are charukot. I've hare'ez, but going back to the goat, right? Charukot, its horns are charukot, but it still is asur. It's still a behemoth. The chalbo asur. Says more, you're right, but you also need mefutsalot. You need them to be branched out. Ba'inan. And so a single horn is not enough. You need a mefutzal, a pitzul, a split up horn. Okay. Answers the Gemara. Well, what about its tzvi? Right? What about its tzvi? Tzvi we almost always translate as a deer. De'ein mefutzalot, and its horns are not branched out, and it's a wild animal. Chabal mutar. Enters the Gemara chadurot beinan. You need chadurot, which means they're rounded. So they have to, unlike a A's, right? Which so we're taking back mefutzalot. You don't need mefutzalot, but you do need to have them chadurot, and the horns of an A's are not chadurot. There's a very important Rashi here who says, "What are you talking about? Right? What do you mean that the horns of a deer are not mefutzalot? Horns, of course, are mefutzalot. We've all seen antlers of a deer. Rashi says, Lo yodati, Mike Amar. Well, I don't know what it's talking about. So Rashi says that what he learns from here, Nira Be'inai, Shema she'anu korin tzvi, lo hayohem korin tzvi. They did not refer to the animal that we talk about as a tzvi. So we think of tzvi as a deer or whatever kind of animal like that. They had different animals that they called a tzvi, and Rashi calls a steinbock or a steinbach, which is some kind of I think it's a word that I've heard before. Anyways, Tosfos goes through this in great length and discussion about what the word tzvi actually means. And you can see from this Gemara that it's quite controversial. But either way, the horns of an A's, the horns of a goat do not qualify. Hilkach, therefore, says the Gemara, let me lay this all out for you. Okay? Where are we up to? Around 12 lines, I'd say, from the top. Third one on the line. Hecha de mifatzla. If the horns are branched out, no problem. That's a chaya. Lodina velodaina. No, you don't need a judgment. You don't need a judge. No questions asked. Hecha de lo mefatzla, if the horns are not branched, like a tzvi, whatever a tzvi is, then be'inan kruchot, chadurot, v'charukot. Then you need to have, they have to have kruchot, they have to have layers, they have to be chadurot, they have to be rounded, and charukot, they have to have a groove in them. And it has to be the mivle chirkayo, the grooves have to go into the next groove. So it can't just be, layers that you see them separate, they have to be on top of each other. And that is, says the Gemara, Hainu Sveika Ti'iza Karkuz. And this is the question about, or there was a question about an Iza Karkuz. What was the question on Iza Karkuz? I don't know what Karkuz means in this, meaning it's a type of A's, a type of goat, but I don't exactly know where it comes from. But there was a question of this Iza Karkuz who had horns, it had horns that were Chadurot and Charukot, but we weren't quite sure if it was enough to make it a wild animal, and therefore the fat would be mutar, or if it was a domestic animal like other izim, right? And there was a case, Iza Karkuz, the Havi Reish Galuta, there was an Iza Karkuz that was, delivered to the house of the Reish Galuta. The Akar Malatzana de Tarbamine, they took out a basket full of fat from this animal. This was a super fat goat, and they got tons of fat, right? Now the question is, right, is it a chaya, in which case that fat's all mutar, you can have delicious, whatever, or is it a behema, in which case you got to throw away all the fat? So Rav Achai said it's asar, and Rav Shmuel, Braid Rav Avo, said, I would love to eat this, achal minei, and he had lunch from it. And Karya Nafshe, he said about himself, mi pri pi ish tisbabitno, from the fruit of a man's mouth, meaning because I know the halacha, I can fill up my stomach. So the fact that I know that this Iza Karkuz is really a wild animal, I'm allowed to eat the fat and I can get a great meal. Now, Shalchu Mitam, they sent a message from there, meaning from Eretz Yisrael, Hilchata Kavate de Shmuel Breid Rabbi Avo. In fact, the halacha is like Shmuel Breid Rabbi Avo, that you can eat the fat of an Iza Karkuz, but he's Haruba Rabbeinu Achai. But, Rabbeinu Achai said it's asur, and I wouldn't go around publicizing that you're going against him. Sheme'er Einei Golahu. He lights up the eyes of the whole Gola, meaning he's a super, super respected person. He's wrong, but be respectful of him, even though he's wrong, and maybe don't eat in front of him, Rashi, I think, says, right? But basically, don't publicize this because Rashi actually says, don't say it in front of him, not don't eat it in front of him, but don't say in front of him because he's such a honorable and respectable person. Okay. Now we are halfway down, Daf Nun Ted Amud Bet, and we're up to Keresh, right? And Keresh, again, in many English books, will translate it as Keresh, because we don't know what it is. There's a very, very interesting opinion that I heard, which is that looks at a Keresh as a giraffe. is what I think I've heard before, which is very interesting. But let's see the Gemara and see if it makes any sense. Says the Gemara, a keresh, right? Now remember, the Gemara is assuming that a keresh is mutar to eat, which would be very interesting if a giraffe was mutar. But a keresh is mutar. The question is it a chaya or a behema? And we said, because afal pi she'en lo el keren achat, even though it only has one horn, that's enough. And a horn is a sign that it's a chaya, and mutar, and its fat would be mutar. Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, keresh, what is a keresh? It's tavya de be'ilai. It's a tavya, which usually we translate as like tzvi, right? Tavya is the same word as a gazelle or a deer, that comes from be'ilai. Again, we don't exactly know what that means, right? Tigras, which is another animal, is aryeh de be'ilai. It's a lion that comes from be'ilai. Amar Rav Kahana, now said Rav Kahana, you know, Tisha amhatta havi bein una le'una de aryeh de be'ilai. The lion of Bnei Eli, which is this tigras, has 9 amot from ear to ear. Meaning if you pull off its skin, the whole thing is 9 amot, which is like 15 feet long. Says Rav Yosef, you want to know how long the keresh is? Shitzar amata havi mashche de tav de Be'elai. The length of the tavya de Be'elai, which is what we said is the keresh, is 16 amot, which is one of the proof when people say it's a giraffe, right? It's 16 amot, which is like 25 feet, which is the height of a giraffe. So anyways, and it has one horn. Whether it's true or not, there's a lot of other things. Anyways, continues the Gemara, a couple stories which we are going to have till the end of today's daf. Amalei Kesar Rabbi Shua ben Chananya. Once the Kesar, the Caesar of Rome, said to Rabbi Shua ben Chananya, who lived, of course, after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, when the Romans were in Israel, but maybe Rabbi Shua ben Chananya was in Rome, for all we know. So the Kesar said to Rabbi Shua ben Chananya, you know, Elohechem ka'aryeh matil. Your God is like a lion, is compared to a lion. The Chtiv, as the pasuk says in Amos, Aryeh sha'ag milo yira. The lion roars, who won't be afraid? And of course, that was a reference to Hashem, angry at the people. Says the Gemara, Marabute, what's the big deal of God being a lion? Parsha katil Aryeh. My Parsha is my soldiers, they kill lions all the time. So, lion, I'm not scared of a lion. Amralei, so Rav Yeshua ben Chananya said to the Kesar, Lav kahai aryeh matil. God is not compared to that kind of lion, a regular, lion that you see in the zoo, maybe. Ka'aryeh de be'iloi matil. God is compared to the aryeh that we mentioned in the previous Gemara of be'iloi, which is, this really is what we called tigris before, which is some animal that is much more wild and strong than a regular lion. Amrali, so the Kesar said, well, I want to see that lion. I can't see God, but let me see this lion of Be'ilai that you're comparing somehow Lahavdil God to. Amrali, so Chanina Bishua ben Chananya said, Lo matzid chazitla, I can't show it to you. It's too scary. Amrali, so the Kesar said, no. Ivra, in reality, truth, chazinali, I want to see it. You must show it to me. So, okay. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya boy rachmi davened Hashem, and itaker miduchte, and this lion, this Aryeh de Be'ilai, got up from its place. I don't know where its place is. It's in a zoo and somewhere. It got up from its place and it started coming towards. Let's say they were in Rome. Started coming towards Rome. Okay, Kiavi marchik arba mea parsi. When it got to be 400 parsa away, which is 100 miles away, more than that, several hundred miles away. Nahem chad kala. It roared one time. It let out one sound, and the sound was so great, and the sound impact and the fear in Rome, 400 parsot away, apilu koma barta. Every pregnant woman had a miscarriage. Everyone lost their baby. It was so terrifying. Vishura de Romi nafal, and the walls of Rome fell down. So the scream of the lion basically was so loud that it devastated Rome from 400 parsa away. Kept coming. At the Merchik Tlatria Parsi, when this lion was 300 parsa away, Nahim Kalachvinin roared again. And then it roared so much that people's dentures came out. Nater Kaki Vishini de Gavri. The Kaki means the front teeth and the back teeth of people fell out, right? Va'afun Nafalmi Korsela Ara, and the Caesar fell off his throne onto the ground. It was like an earthquake. Amalei, so finally Caesar said to Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, I pray, I beg you, Boy Rachmile asked for comfort for God that the lion should go back to its resting place. Boy Rachmile Bahadle Atre, and this famous lion went back to its place and has not been heard from since. So, anyways, that was the story, and we quoted obviously very agav because we mentioned this lion. Not that it's kosher, but we mentioned it agav the keresh, which is kosher. Let's do one more story. I don't want to leave you guys too much tomorrow. We are 3 lines from the bottom. Amalei Kesher Rabbi Shua ben Chananya, another story of where the Caesar asked Rabbi Shua ben Chananya, he said to him, I really want to see your God. I really want to see your God. Amalei, so Rabbi Shua ben Chananya said, sorry, no deal. I can't show him to you. There's no one can look at Hashem. Amalei, and the Kesar was persistent. Ivra, in reality, really, truthfully, I want to see your God, right? Ivra means emet, but I want to see it. So Azal, okay, so fine. So Rabbi Shua ben Chananya came up with a solution. Azal, he went ukme lahade, or on top of daf samach amud aleph, top line, third word. Azal, he took him ukme lahade yuma. He took him in front of the sun. Bitkufat Tammuz, in the middle of the summer. Now is Tammuz, even later in the summer. He stood in July or August, right under the sun. Amalei said, stare at the sun. Istakel Bey. I want you to stare at the sun. Amalei, and of course, this Kesar looked up and said, I can't do it. I can't stare at the sun in this time of year. Amalei, lo matzina. I can't bear to look at the sun. I'll fry my corneas. Amalei, so Rabbi Shua ben Chananya said, think about what you just said. Yoma, think of the Yoma, which means here the sun, right? The day, but it means the sun. Right? It's one of the servants that stands in front of God. And Amrit, you said, Kesar, lo matzina you can't look at it. So Shechina lo kol shekain. Don't you think the Shechina, which created the sun, which made the sun, for sure you won't be able to look at. And so there is no chance to look at the sun, the God, I mean, and he held him there. I'm going to stop here. We are 5 lines from the top of Samach Amud Aleph, and we will continue tomorrow with more stories of the Kesar. We'll get to the daughter of the Kesar and discussions with Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya. Hope everyone has a great week, and I hope next week to be learning again together in real time in person. Shavua Tov.